The sound of the hallway was a sharpened knife, polished marble that threw back every noise amplified. The high-pitched hum of Ren Ito's floor polisher was his only anchor, a constant, predictable sound in an ocean of chaos. He moved with the machine, tracing perfect overlapping lines on the skyscraper's floor, a silent ballet only he understood. But then, another sound tore through his peace. A voice, loud, arrogant, full of rough edges. The voice of Karim Marchand, a producer whose Italian shoes always announced his arrival with an impatient click. Karim was on the phone shouting about stocks, about millions, about a guaranteed bet. His voice was like broken glass inside a metal drum. For Ren, who navigated the world through hearing, it was physical pain. He hunched his shoulders, tried to focus on the friendly hum of the machine, but Karim's voice pierced through everything. Disoriented by the sonic assault, his foot snagged on the floor polisher's cord. He stumbled, and the heavy machine slid, hitting Karim's leather briefcase with a dull thud. The silence that followed was worse than the shout. Karim hung up the phone. "Can't you see where you're going?" He spat the words, before realizing the irony. He looked at Ren's eyes, which focused on nothing, at the folded white cane clipped to his belt. A cruel smile formed on his lips. "Oh, right. You can't see at all." He leaned in, the scent of his expensive cologne invading Ren's space. "What's wrong? Did the noise scare you, kid?" Ren was frozen, his hands trembling, a hum of panic growing in his ears. He could only stammer, referring not to Karim's shout, but to the sound of the company the producer had mentioned on the phone. "The sound is wrong," he whispered, like a bell, a cracked bell. "Where are you watching from today? Every city has a sound, a vibration." Ren felt them all. Subscribe to not miss stories like this, which remind us to listen more closely. My first memory of Ren isn't an image, but a sound. I am Helena Yilmaz Karas, his older sister. I remember him in his crib, mere months old, not crying but emitting a low, constant hum. It was the sound of the refrigerator motor. Mom found it strange. Dad said he was a musical baby. The truth, which we would take years to uncover, was far more complex. Ren was tuning into the world. While other babies focused on faces and colors, Ren focused on frequencies, on vibration patterns. The world for him was a symphony. The rain on the window wasn't just falling water. It was a gentle percussion with pitch variations depending on the size of the drops and the strength of the wind. The traffic on the street wasn't noise. It was a flow of bass and treble that told a story about the time of day and the city's mood. The autism diagnosis came at 4 years old. It was both a relief and a burden. A relief for finally giving a name to his unique way of existing. A burden because of the label, the stigma society imposed. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. When he wanted to show me something, he'd take my hand and tap rhythmically on an object, inviting me to hear its music. I learned to understand that the low hum of the heater soothed him, while the high-pitched whistle of the microwave was an assault. Our home became an acoustically curated environment. We replaced the doorbell with one that sounded like wind chimes, bought quieter appliances, and I learned to walk on tiptoe. The blindness was a different blow, a rare degenerative disease that stole his vision gradually, starting in adolescence. It was cruel. The world, already overwhelming, also became invisible. For a time, he retreated completely. The boy who once found joy in the vibration of a wooden floor now sat for hours in his room, in absolute silence, as if trying to disappear. The symphony of the world had become a frightening cacophony. It was during this period that his auditory universe became even more acute, as if all the energy his eyes could no longer use had been redirected to his ears. He began to notice things no one else did. He knew I was coming home by the specific sound of my car's engine 2 blocks away. He could tell if Mom was sad by the rhythm of her breathing from across the room. His hearing wasn't just a navigation tool. It was an emotion reader, a truth detector. He heard the micro-tensions in a person's voice, the almost imperceptible hesitation before a lie. For him, words were just the surface. Melody. The real story lay in the harmony beneath them, in the frequency, the tone, the resonance. A calm person's voice sounded to him like a cello, someone anxious, like a out-of-tune violin. This is how he relearned to trust the world, not through his eyes, but through its vibrations. Finding a place for him in this loud visual world, however, was our constant struggle. Society has no room for silent symphonies. It demands words, eye contact, conformity. And Ren, with his rich inner world and his contained outer demeanor, was a mystery few had the patience to unravel. The night cleaner job at Marchand Global Media's building was the best we could manage. A quiet environment after everyone had left. A predictable routine. A way for him to have his independence, to feel like he belonged somewhere. Little did we know that the safest place we found for him would put him in the path of the loudest, most dissonant person he had ever encountered. Before the cracked bell, there was a long road of broken hopes. Every new specialist, every recommended therapy was presented as the magic solution that would make Ren function in our world. The first was sensory integration therapy. They'd put him in a room full of stimuli, swings, flashing lights, and different textures. The idea was to desensitize him. For Ren, it was torture. I'd pick him up at the end of each session and he'd be exhausted, pale, curled in on himself. He'd spend the rest of the day in his dark room, trying to rebalance his overloaded nervous system. It was like trying to heal a burn by throwing the person into fire. We stopped after 3 months, when I saw him have his first severe meltdown, a complete collapse where his body trembled uncontrollably, unable to process one more single stimulus. Then came the well-intentioned advice from family. He just needs more discipline, an uncle would say. If he tried harder to look people in the eye, he'd get used to it. They didn't understand that for Ren, eye contact was like looking directly into the sun. It was an overload of information that left him dizzy and nauseated. We tried to push him gently. "Look at me, Ren. Just for a second." The anguish on his face was so profound, the way he'd avert his gaze as if physically injured, that we realized how wrong we were. We weren't helping him connect. We were teaching him that connection was painful. The pain this caused me was immense. I felt like a traitor, forcing my brother to endure something that hurt him, all in the name of a normalcy that meant nothing to him. At school, the pressure was institutional. Meetings with teachers and principals were always the same. He's intelligent, we know that, but he doesn't participate. He needs to learn to work in groups. His refusal to speak in class is a behavioral problem. They wanted him to fit into a square mold, without realizing that Ren was made of circles and waves. The suggestion of a therapeutic aid in the classroom was a disaster. The constant presence of an adult by his side only stigmatized him further, making him a target for the silent bullying of other students. He became the weird kid with the shadow. He stopped trying. He retreated into his auditory shell, his only safe haven. The outside world was a minefield of expectations he couldn't and shouldn't have to meet. The job search was the most recent chapter of this false hope. Interviews were impossible. The handshake, the eye contact, the open-ended questions, and the need to sell himself were insurmountable barriers. Job agencies for people with disabilities offered repetitive jobs in noisy factory settings, the worst imaginable scenario for him. With each rejection, I saw a bit of his light dim. He began to believe what the world told him, that he was incapable, that there was no place for him. The night cleaner position seemed like a blessing, not because it was glamorous, but because it respected his needs. It was solitary, it was predictable, and above all, it was quiet. It was a job where he could finally be himself, without the pressure of having to perform a version of himself that didn't exist. It was hard-won peace, a truce in the war against a world that insisted on fixing him, instead of just listening to him. And it was this fragile peace that Karim Marchand shattered with his voice and his contempt. Human conflict rarely looks like an open battle. It's more like slow erosion, a constant wearing, down caused by small waves of misunderstanding. Karim Marchand wasn't a comic book villain who woke up planning to be cruel. He was worse, a man so immersed in his own world of power and urgency that other people, especially those he considered lesser, were mere set dressing. Before the hallway incident, we'd already had glimpses of his nature. Once, he walked past Ren and tossed an almost empty coffee cup into the nearest trash can, missing the mark. The liquid splashed onto the freshly cleaned floor. Karim didn't even slow down. Ren, without a word, grabbed his cloth and wiped up the mess, the sound of the cloth on the floor like a sigh of resignation. The building was a microcosm of society, There were people like Julia Ramirez, a production assistant who always gave Ren a kind goodnight, even if he just nodded. And there were dozens like Karim, who passed Ren as if he were invisible, part of the furniture. Ren's father, before he passed away, was in denial for a long time. He loved his son but couldn't accept him. He's just a shy boy, he'd say. He'll grow out of it. This denial, coming from someone so close, was a form of conflict, an invisible barrier that prevented Ren from being fully accepted in his own home. It took years for my father to understand that Ren didn't need to be fixed, but loved for who he was. That late acceptance was a balm, but the scars of initial misunderstanding remained. In practice, Ren's daily conflict was a constant negotiation with his environment. The replacement of a fluorescent light bulb in the hallway could be a destabilizing event, as the hum of the new bulb had a different frequency, a sonic color that grated on his nerves. He needed routine, predictability, to feel safe. The cleaning job gave him that. Start on the 20th floor, proceed clockwise, empty the trash cans first, then vacuum, then wipe down surfaces. It was a ritual, a moving meditation. Any break in this routine, like a locked office, that should have been open, could generate immense anxiety. His supervisor, Daniel Renault, was a decent but pragmatic man. He saw Ren as a reliable, efficient employee, but didn't understand the complexities behind his efficiency. To Daniel, Ren's insistence on using a specific type of trash bag was an eccentricity. To Ren, it was because that material produced a soft, muffled sound, unlike others that emitted a harsh, grating noise. The conflict wasn't malice. It was ignorance. It was people's inability to imagine a sensory reality so different from their own. Karim Marchand was just the loudest, cruelest manifestation of this ignorance. When he humiliated Ren, he wasn't just attacking a blind autistic man, he was attacking the entire system Ren had meticulously built to survive. He kicked out the structure of his piece, and the sound Ren heard, the cracked bell, wasn't just about a stock. It was the sound of his own world shattering. The turning point didn't happen with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. After the encounter with Karim, Ren was deeply shaken. He came home and didn't leave his room for a full day. He just repeated the phrase softly, to himself. The bell is cracked. The bell is cracked. I had no idea what it meant. I thought it was a metaphor for his own emotional state that he felt broken inside. I tried to comfort him, but words seemed to fall short. The next day at work, he was quiet, almost robotic in his movements. The quiet joy he found in his routine had vanished. That's when Jonas Martinez entered the picture. Jonas was a junior financial analyst, a young man who worked late most nights. He was different from the others. He saw Ren. He noticed the patterns Ren drew with the floor polisher, the way he organized cleaning supplies with perfect symmetry. Sometimes he'd leave a chocolate on his table with a note saying, "For the night guardian of the 20th floor." Ren never responded, but I knew he appreciated the gesture. Jonas was in the hallway when Karim humiliated Ren. He saw everything, and he heard the line about the cracked bell. Unlike me, he connected it to the context. Karim's call about quantum leap tech, the stock that was Wall Street's new darling. That night, Jonas saw Ren working, pale and distant. He approached him carefully. "Ren, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Ren didn't respond, just kept cleaning, but his rhythm was off, anxious. Jonas tried again. "I heard what you said yesterday, about the bell. What did you mean?" Ren stopped. He turned towards Jonas's voice, but his eyes didn't focus. He seemed to be listening to something very far away. "It's not a pure sound," Ren said with difficulty. "The frequency, it has a tremor, a dissonance, like a metal wire stretched too tight about to snap." Jonas, a man of spreadsheets and algorithms, could have dismissed it as delusion, but he looked at Ren's face, at the absolute conviction and distress in his expression. He remembered the arrogance in Karim's voice, the blind certainty of the market sharks, and he felt a pull, a mixture of compassion and curiosity. He went back to his desk, opened his analysis terminal, and started investigating Quantum Leap. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Record earnings, optimistic projections, but Ren's description, a wire stretched too tight, made him dig deeper. He went beyond the headline reports and delved into the raw data, into derivative trades, into the whispers on investor forums. And there, hidden beneath layers of optimism, he found it. An anomaly. A pattern of block sales by low-level executives. An unsustainable reliance on a single supplier that was on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't something the big analysts were seeing. It was a tremor, a dissonance, the sound of a bell about to crack. The silent turning point wasn't Ren making a prediction. It was someone, for the first time, deciding to take his language seriously. The first small victory wasn't loud. It was Jonas's quiet decision to act. The next morning, his heart in his mouth, he sold the few Quantum Leap shares he owned and advised his parents to do the same. He tried to warn his boss, who laughed him off. "You're basing a financial analysis on what the cleaner said? Martinez, focus on the data, not fairy tales." Jonas swallowed the humiliation and stayed quiet. The victory, in that moment, was trusting his own intuition and Ren's perception, even if the world called him crazy. The second victory came 48 hours later. The news about Quantum Leap's supplier went public. Panic set in. The stock, which was seen as a rocket, became a stone. In a matter of hours, it lost 80% of its value, taking down the portfolios of arrogant investors like Karim Marchand. In the office, the atmosphere was like a funeral. Jonas's boss, who had ridiculed him, was pale, staring at his screen with glazed eyes. He said nothing to Jonas, but the look he exchanged with him held a new, bitter dose of respect. The victory wasn't seeing others lose. It was validation, proof that Ren's perception wasn't an illness, but a gift. That night, Jonas sought out Ren. He didn't greet him with elation or awe. He approached with a quiet reverence and handed him a box. Inside, there was a pair of the highest quality noise-canceling headphones. "To help quiet the bad bells," Jonas said. Ren took the box, his fingers exploring the soft texture of the packaging. He didn't say thank you with words. He put on the headphones, and for the first time in days, a small, genuine smile appeared on his face. The world finally was at the volume he wanted. That was the most important victory. A gesture of understanding, a tool that gave him control over his own sensory universe. The other victories came in a cascade. Daniel Renault, the supervisor, heard the rumors about Ren's prediction. He didn't understand how, but he understood that there was more to his quiet employee than he'd imagined. He called Ren into his office, and instead of giving orders, he asked, "Ren, is there anything we can do to make your job better for you?" It was the first time anyone at work had ever asked him that. Ren, through me, asked for an even more rigid work schedule and the assurance that no one would interrupt him. Daniel agreed without hesitation. Small gestures of respect began to emerge from other employees. People who had previously ignored him now gave him a nod. They kept their voices low when he was nearby. They didn't treat him like an oracle, but like a human being whose needs mattered. The biggest victory wasn't predicting the stock market crash. It was, finally, being seen and heard on his own terms. The most profound transformation didn't happen in the stock market, but within me. Watching all of this, I realized the extent of my own failure. I loved my brother. I defended him, but deep down, I also saw him through the lens of his lack. I focused on what he couldn't do. He couldn't make eye contact. He couldn't have a conventional conversation. He couldn't navigate the world like I did. I was so busy trying to build bridges from his world to mine that I never stopped to cross the bridge in the other direction and truly inhabit his world. The Quantum Leap prediction forced me to reevaluate everything. What Ren did wasn't magic. It was data analysis. It turned out his data wasn't numbers on a screen. It was frequency patterns, harmonics, timbres. He heard the instability in the company's structure the way a sound engineer hears a micro-crack in material under stress. The arrogance in Karim Marchand's voice, the underlying anxiety in how he pronounced the company's name, the feverish haste in his speech pattern, these were all data points for Ren. He didn't predict the future, he heard the present with a clarity the rest of us, distracted by our eyes, couldn't grasp. I started talking to him differently. Instead of asking, "How was your day?" which was too abstract a question, I asked, "What were the sounds of your day?" And he would describe the world to me in a way I could never have imagined. The orange sound of the heater turning on in the morning. The square, gray sound of the office computers. Jonas's voice, he told me, sounded like smooth, warm wood. Kareem's was like metal scratching glass. He had a form of auditory emotional synesthesia, where sounds had colors, textures, and temperatures that reflected the emotional truth behind them. His disability wasn't an absence of ability, but an abundance of another, a sensitivity so extreme that the ordinary world became overwhelming. The headphones Jonas gave him weren't to isolate him, but to allow him to filter out the noise and focus on the important signals. He didn't live in a smaller world than ours. He lived in a high-definition world, while we settled for a blurry image. Accepting this was liberating. The pain of constant worry gave way to deep admiration. I stopped trying to be his translator to the world and started learning his language. And I realized that the true disability wasn't his blindness or his autism, but the world's deafness to anything that didn't fit its narrow expectations. What happened to Kareem Marchand? He lost almost everything. His reputation, much of his fortune. He wasn't fired, but he was demoted. His arrogance replaced by a silent bitterness. Revenge, however, was never the point. Ren's story wasn't about Kareem's downfall, but about Ren's ascent to his own dignity. Their paths crossed again a few weeks later. Ren was cleaning the same hallway. Kareem emerged from the elevator, shoulders slumped, his once decisive stride now dragging. He saw Ren, and for an instant, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. He quickly looked away and hurried his pace as if fleeing a ghost. Ren didn't even notice him. He was in his own world, with his new headphones, listening not to silence, but to a carefully curated selection of ambient sounds. He had a small smile on his face, the same smile he had when he heard the rain or the refrigerator hum as a child. He was at peace. He hadn't defeated an enemy. He had found harmony in his own universe. The pain of the past, the humiliations, the false hopes, none of it disappeared completely. The scars are still there. The world continues to be a noisy and often hostile place. But now, Ren has tools. And more importantly, he has allies. Jonas Martinez became his closest friend. They developed a ritual. Once a week, Jonas would read Ren the names of a few companies and describe their businesses. Ren would listen intently and describe the sounds those names and concepts evoked in him. "This one sounds hollow, like a big empty drum," he said once about an overvalued tech startup that collapsed months later. "This other one sounds like a stream, small, but with a steady flow." They didn't use this to make money. For Jonas, it was a way to test his own analyses against a completely different form of intelligence. For Ren, it was a game, a fascinating puzzle that allowed him to use his gift in a way that connected him to another person. Hope, for us, is not that Ren will become a Wall Street guru or that the entire world will suddenly understand autism. Hope is more real, more intimate. It's in the friendship with Jonas. It's in the respect from his boss, Daniel. It's in the small gestures of kindness from colleagues. Hope is the proof that, even in a world that values the loudest voice, a whisper of truth, if heard by the right person, can change everything. Ren doesn't need the world to change for him. He just needs a few people willing to learn to listen. The world called him disabled, until he taught the world to listen. True strength often resides in the quietest places, in the perceptions we ignore. Ren's story reminds us that everyone has a unique way of experiencing reality, and that empathy begins when we stop talking and start truly listening. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Someone might need to hear this today.